yeah, sure, I'm introverted. There are a bunch of other introverts. But becoming a more impactful storyteller and speaker will give you so many business opportunities. And the cool thing is those whole things around networking, around having to build the craziest connection or so, you don't need to do that. Just focus on delivering crazy amount of good value through storytelling and speaking, and people will come to you.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Resonate. On this podcast today, we have a guest whose work I have followed closely for some time. He is an expert in storytelling and public speaking, and I think he has a lot of the wisdom and actionable strategies that we can apply from today that help us to become a more magnetic and more authentic leader. So the quick formal intro on Philipp before I give him the welcome. He helps sales professionals, leaders, and entrepreneurs master the art of storytelling to stand out in business. He is the author of 3 best-selling books, Storytelling for Business, The Storytelling Method, and Public Speaking with Confidence. He has over 97,000 subscribers on YouTube. He's given a TEDx on the secret to building confidence and has worked with many companies, including Google, Salesforce, Visa, and American Express. So with no further ado, let's welcome Philipp to Resonate.
Hi, Shannon. Thanks for having me.
So I read your book over the weekend, Story Selling, sorry. And there was something that you admitted, I quite liked it at the beginning, that storytelling is a bit of a buzzword right now. In my experience, as I also teach storytelling, is that we seem to say, okay, what's the story about this? What's the narrative? What's the storytelling? Give some storytelling. But no one really knows what it means or how to do it very well. And yet it is very having this trending moment, I think, as we are moving into a space where we crave more authenticity and more connection. I'd love to hear your take on why you think storytelling in particular is having its moment in the limelight right now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially if we take any meetings that we have, right? And that applies to every single role that is out there. If you're listening to this right now and you think back to a meeting that you had maybe like a week ago, and you think, how much do I actually remember from that meeting? And well, I can just speak for myself, but most of the times I forgot 99% of what was being said in that meeting. So everything gone. Right now in today's business world, but also in media, we just consume so much information, but really nothing sticks. And so stories are this opportunity to stand out, to become more memorable. So when you tell a story, that story will actually be remembered, not just a day after, but really months, if not years after.
So would you say something like facts or stories are the glue that make facts and figures stick?
That's it.
Yeah. Because the idea of storytelling is not to just be all emotional fluff, but there's ways that actually there could be a credible data-driven point behind it that they just want to bring to life through a narrative, through a story.
That's it, yeah.
Have you had any personal experiences or maybe experiences in companies that you've worked for where you have firsthand witnessed the positive results that have come from story-based approaches?
Yeah. I guess one specific moment that I had was last, I think it was November. I was going here on the food market in Amsterdam where I live. And there usually I just buy a bunch of fruits, but this day I buy this very sweet Dutch type of candy, like a waffle. And then as I was waiting there, someone taps me on the shoulder and I look around and I'm like, who are you? And the guy says, hey, Philipp, it's Dan. I was in your workshop. And at first I didn't recognize it, but then I realized, yes, he was in my workshop 3 years ago. And I asked him a little bit how he was. And he then told me, I still remember that story that you told 3 years ago. And I actually told that to a bunch of my friends. And I asked him, well, what story was that? And he said, it was the story about your nephew and the avocado. And we talked a little bit more. But in that moment, I just realized like, hey, this is a story that I told a stranger 3 years back. And here the story goes on where he told that story to other people that I've never met in my life. And so that's really the power of storytelling. There's no other tool that spreads so quickly than a story.
Mhm. It's funny because it is such a big part of what made me rebrand this podcast to Resonate, in fact. And I chose the word resonate because I think that's exactly what stories do when they're done well. They generate that deeper connection in people. And I think part of that is accepting that you need to know also who you're speaking to. Because I think that whilst there are some general universal themes that we all like justice, fairness, some general values and principles, there are also specific people who will resonate with one type of message more than another. In that instance, would you advise people to do storytelling quite broadly, or would you say focus on the particulars of, like, let's say, pain points of customers or something else?
Yeah. Why is storytelling in business oftentimes so lousy? It is because people stay way too much at this very high level. They say like, oh, we had a problem, then we did those things to overcome the problem, and well, that was the result. Now that is super, super boring. But people keep telling stories like that. So my biggest recommendation, if you want to tell a great story, no matter whether in business or outside of business, just zoom into one specific moment. Just one specific moment and bring that to life. And so, for example, if anyone is sharing a customer story, well, zoom into the moment where they tell you about their problem. So, for example, you say, "Hey, 3 weeks ago, I met with my customer Shannon, and right in this call, she said, hey, Philip, I don't know what's going on right now, but our entire supply chain is on the brink of collapse. Like, we need to fix this right now." And then I can talk a little bit more about this. But at the end, it's about zooming into one specific moment where you share what was the dialogue of that moment. What were you thinking in that moment? What were you doing in that moment? So that is really the single most important thing when it comes to storytelling is instead of trying to tell an entire story, just zoom into one moment and share what you learned from that.
I want to come to the how in a moment because I know that you have a lot of different formulas and things that you use to make this very applicable, very actionable, and quite simple. Because I think a lot of people at first will think, I'm out of my depth. I don't know how to do this. It seems a little bit complicated. However, I want to address the people listening who have doubts about storytelling. So, some of the things that I've come across in my work are people don't think this is applicable in a formal work context. So whilst they'd agree, okay, maybe this is a great thing to do when you're having a coffee with your colleagues to make a connection and create an amiable atmosphere, it's not the kind of thing I can do when I have 20 minutes to go and present the strategy for our business for the next quarter, for example. So they'll say, I don't think storytelling is appropriate here. I don't think that it is efficient. I worry that it's not going to look professional. And also, when you ask me to tell a personal story, well, I just don't see the relevance of that in what I do. People don't care about my personal experiences here. They just want to know the facts. There's some of the things that I have come across. So could you just take some of those themes and let's say, in your view, are they myths? And would you have a different message to share to people who are currently thinking that?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about a few situations where you could use stories to make your message land much better. The first one is just on building a connection at the start. For example, oftentimes we spend so much time talking about the weather, talking about traffic, but instead you can use those first 1 to 2 minutes of any meeting really to share actually something already a little bit more meaningful about yourself, something that shows a little bit more about you as a human. And so it's not that you then take more time in your conversation. You can just share a story to build much more of a connection. So that's one option. The other option is imagine a lot of us, we're working with a lot of data. And so you could obviously just start your presentation and say something like, oh, well, today I'm going to share with you the results of the last quarter and then go into the findings. Or you could share a tiny story that raises the anticipation. So you could say, hey, just 5 days ago, I was at my desk running this analysis, going through 10,000 data cells. And on this one slide, on this one point, I see this massive drop. And when I looked a little bit deeper, I realized that there's one thing that we've been missing all the time. And today I'm going to share with you what that thing is and how it's going to save us 30 million a year. So that just as an example, right? So here I wasn't sharing a big story, but even just sharing how I discovered that number now already increases the anticipation. Everyone will be like, "Ooh, what is that thing? I want to know that." That's a much more effective way than just saying, "Ah, here's my findings," right?
Yes, so powerful. And people, I think in our space, we are so familiar with this because, of course, we are told, well, what is the hook that you're going to share in that initial piece of content, or that makes somebody click on your YouTube video, Philip, or click on my podcast episode. But then I think in the corporate context in particular, I see the standard, admittedly very boring title slide that is always very factual, doesn't say a lot, and it's just like the contents that people quickly skip over. So, back as PowerPoint slide behind me, and I say quarterly update on financial analysis. Today, I'm going to talk with you over points 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I'll leave some room for questions at the end. Like, this is the standard, right? This is what everyone defaults to. And I think in some level, it takes a little bit of courage to break that norm and to do exactly what you have just said, especially if it goes against what the people around you are doing and what the culture has been built around. And yet, what you're explaining here, Philip, and what research is showing us is that if we start with this personable, real moment that sparks curiosity, that leaves a sense of anticipation, that is going to really drive not only engagement, but also memorability long after the meeting.
That's it. Yeah. And oftentimes those ones, it can be a story, like how I shared it right now, but even just a sentence where you anticipate the content that is about to come, that already can make such a difference. For example, you can share with them at the start, like a big promise, where you say, hey, today you'll uncover how to save 2.5 million every year. For example, now everyone would be listening, right? Or you can do that after every single slide. So for example, you talk about one slide, then you want to click to the next slide. But instead of clicking on the next slide and then just describing it, you say, the next slide, that's actually my personal favorite. If you just take away one thing from today, let it be that. And so you see those things raise anticipation. They make your listeners curious for what is about to come. And so try to have those mini hooks throughout the entire presentation because it will get people to pay attention.
I want to come to a formula for this, but first, what made you personally so interested in storytelling? What made you start your business?
For me, it started back actually then with when I was laid off. Back then, I was a product manager at Uber, and right with COVID, I lost my job. And in that time, I thought, like, what am I going to do with my life, right? This entire tech thing, this was my life, my people, my family, everyone was there. And I remember on this one day, I was here in my apartment browsing through random animal videos on YouTube. And at one point, this ad pops up. And it was this ad by Charity Water. It's this nonprofit from the States. And I don't know how, but somehow I didn't click away that ad after the couple of seconds. But I kept watching this entire thing for 27 minutes. And after that, I thought, when I watched the full ad, what we just went on? That was the first long ad that I've ever watched in my life. So I actually rewatched it. And then I realized that guy, the CEO of Charity Water, the ad that I was seeing, he was just sharing stories. He was just sharing stories of his origin, about how they helped other companies, how they helped other customers. And he got me so engaged. And when I saw this, I thought, hey, this is a freaking superpower. I got to learn it. And that's when I actually got started and took the decision, I want to look into this.
Do you consider yourself to be a natural storyteller?
No, I consider myself a lousy storyteller. I never told any stories in front of friends. I actually never spoke in public. I only learned that from that moment onward that I just mentioned. But that's why it's so liberating, because I know you don't need to be a natural storyteller in order to feel very comfortable speaking in public or sharing a great story. With the right techniques, anyone can be the most captivating storyteller out there.
Do you consider yourself an introvert?
Yes, fully.
I would have thought that about you. And see, I'm on the more extroverted side, and I think that's in some ways perhaps it's an advantage. It's meant that it's sort of easier for me to naturally connect or open up. But I have found so many people who are more introverted coming and saying to me like, "Well, Shannon, it's easy for you, but you don't understand for me, I'm really shy, or this is really difficult," or so I'd love for you to speak about your experience with that, perhaps about being on the shyer side, and how what you have done and built as a business has really helped you in other areas of your life, not only at work.
Yeah. One thing that I would like to share before we go into that is something that I heard that's really cool, very applicable for any introvert. And I tried to do justice. I heard it from Eric Edmeets, who I was interviewing for my channel. And he's also an introvert. And he gave me the scenario. Imagine you go to a conference and your goal is to make as many meaningful business connections as possible. Now, version 1 of yourself, you will go there and network, right? You ask every single person for their business card. You go in there, you hustle, you say hi to everyone. And at the end of the day, you have a bunch of business cards. That's person A. But then person B, also introvert, both the same. He goes there as a speaker. He then shows up at this conference as a speaker, gives an incredible keynote. After the keynote, he goes down. A bunch of people give him their business cards. Both of them, let's say end of the day, have the same amount of business cards. But once person B, the speaker, when he calls those people, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, we want to work with you. Yeah, we'd love to." The other person, they won't even remember that guy. And so I found this so fascinating when Eric told me that, because yeah, sure, I'm introverted. There are a bunch of other introverts, but becoming a more impactful storyteller and speaker will give you so many business opportunities. And the cool thing is those whole things around networking, around having to build the craziest connection. So you don't need to do that. Just focus on delivering crazy amount of good value through storytelling and speaking, and people will come to you.
So powerful. A quote I have had top of mind so much recently, it's actually from Einstein, and he says, "Strive not to be a success, but to be a value." And that has been such a guiding point for me, because I think there's this focus so much on, well, ourselves. When it comes to like public speaking or storytelling, we just think that spotlight is on us and everyone could be judging us, and it's also nerve-wracking. And I think when you actually flip the script and approach it from that place of like, where can I be of value? Where can I be of service to help other people with my gifts? I think that just shifts things so much.
Beautiful, Shannon.
So let's come to the formulas. Let's take first this example of somebody who needs to give presentations at work, and they are typically very dry. So they've got, 15 minutes and they need to explain things that are rather factual. They've never really given storytelling a shot before, and perhaps feel a little bit vulnerable or unsure about telling something personal. Where would you advise these people to start?
Okay. So I would say there are 3 types of stories that are most relevant for anyone giving a presentation or in business. Number 1 is one to captivate someone at the start. And that is just right at the start in terms of a hook. Can you have a story to break the ice at the start? For example, let's say I'm giving a presentation right now on customer support. Well, then my story could be, hey, just 2 weeks ago, I went to the coffee shop around the corner. And right when I got my card out to pay, the owner, Joey, he looked at me and said, "All good. This one is on the house." I looked at him. "Really? Why?" "Because you deserve it." Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about how we can replicate that same level of customer loyalty into our processes. And then you can go into the rest of the presentation. So that as one example, right? Anytime that you want to start a presentation, think, is there some sort of experience, some personal experience that is somehow related to the theme that would break the ice? And sometimes I know we're trying to have the exact perfect story for every single moment, but it doesn't have to be. I remember my previous job at Uber, I still remembered one speaker out of all the other speakers. All the others I've forgotten. And that was the head of finance back then, Michi Bude. And what he did every single time, he started with the most random story about, I don't know, his family, about some random discovery. And it just made him appear more human. And oftentimes it had nothing to do with the topic. So just having any sort of personal story at the start to break the ice can be very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the first one. The second one would be coaching stories. So anytime that you want to communicate a value or something that you stand for, something that you want to learn, you have to ask yourself, is there something in my past where that comes to life? If, for example, one of your values is, you shall always follow up 5 times. Well, is there a moment in your past where you actually had a problem, but by following up 5 times, you overcame that problem? And so that's the second story type. And the third one is a customer story. That can be an internal customer or external customer. So anytime that you want to pitch an idea, sell a service, sell a product, think, is there another similar customer that had the same problem and that you helped overcome the problem? And that's his story.
I suppose the benefit of the last one would also be that gives you a strong authority, because that's showing that you have part of the solution to what somebody else is going through.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's come to your first one where you say, tell a story that captivates. Would you suggest here that people work backwards? So this is about how do people actually find these stories if they don't just magically come to mind in the given moment? Would you say, okay, I want to tell a story about how numbers are declining right now, our profit is declining at our company, but we want to turn it around, let's say. And they know that as a leader, they need to come and they need to rally to motivate the staff to do to change strategies, to feel more confident, to turn the ship around as such. Would you say in that moment that they should look for clues either in their own personal life or in other companies, for example, that have a similar message, that had a similar outcome, and then they reverse engineer it? Mm-hmm. Or do you have another approach?
Okay. 2 approaches. One is a little bit more short term, and the other one is a little bit more long term. The short term approach is you say, hey, ChatGPT, I have this presentation coming up. Here's the topic. Can you help me brainstorm a few stories that I could start off to break the ice? And then ChatGPT will ask you a bunch of questions. Hey, this is what you might consider. And then usually a story might pop to your head. That I would say is a short-term approach, but it's very effective. The other more long-term approach is to have a very big story bank. And for those of you who don't know what a story bank is, a story bank is this central resource where you gather and classify and organize all of your stories. Every single story that I've ever told, that I've ever come up with, is stored in my story bank. And now, why does it help so much for a meeting? For example, let's say tomorrow I give a topic on resilience. Then I just go into my story bank. Which is a Notion, I then filter by resilience, and voila, then I get 10 stories that I could check out, and I'm like, maybe one of them will be relevant. And so having that story bank allows you then to pull out a story really at any opportunity. And I know sometimes this might feel like a lot of effort, but today also with AI, it's so easy to write down those stories that it's very easy to save them.
I fully agree. And part of I have done both of those things. And I'd say for the first strategy of using ChatGPT, that is so effective when you're under time pressure and when you don't want to overthink it, when you want something quickly. Or can you give me, for example, another company who is in this situation? I, for example, had that when I was looking for a story around a technical pitch done without any emotion, and how that led to a negative consequence. I knew that existed without having a particular story come to mind, and without me being the person who would do that, because I'm not the type of person who would naturally have that approach. And then ChatGPT actually gave me some great examples, one of which ended up becoming featured in my keynote, which was around Steven Sayson, who was a former employee of Kodak, and little known to most of the public, he was actually the inventor of the world's first digital camera. And it was all about how he went to go and pitch this to the executives at Kodak and how his idea got shut down, which then, zooming out years to come, Kodak then went bankrupt. And I was like, wow, this is huge. And that is such a strong example of why storytelling and focusing on the why and the bigger vision and the bigger picture, not just the how and the technical details, could be so powerful. And that idea came through this process you were exactly describing, the co-creation with yourself, your own ideas, and an AI. And to the second point about the story bank, where I think myself and others who I've recommended this to, where we get stuck, is on the filtering process. How does this not become just some horrendous brain dump where you have like hundreds of pages of stuff and no way to search it, and then it actually just brings the overwhelm that you were actually trying to avoid? So what is your strategy for that?
Yes. So the strategy for that is I actually just include a story that I enjoy in some way or the other. But I don't worry too much about there being too many stories in there. Actually, the more stories there are, the better it is. If I can have the 1,000 in there, I'd be delighted. So I would say, don't worry too much about the brain dump. But my benchmark is I put something in the story bank already written out. So I can actually quickly talk about the process that I'm taking. For example, this morning I looked, hey, what happened over the weekend? Then I thought, okay, this was a pretty cool moment that could probably be a good takeaway for someone else. And so then in the moment I opened ChatGPT, I started recording the story, speaking out loud, because I like to speak it out loud, improvise it. Then once I have the recording in the app, I then just asked ChatGPT, hey, could you refine it? Could you make it more conversational, more visual, a little bit more catchy? And then I get this beautiful version back. I maybe do a few more tweaks, and then I pull it off the story bank. And then just by classifying it correctly, so I classify it by story type, I classify it by the topic, I classify it by how much I enjoy telling the story. I already have a few filters that then allow me to look for the best stories relatively quickly.
I actually have also done that for capturing humorous moments. So I've never found myself a particularly funny person. And like most people, you know that you want to, or in the quest of being a little bit more charismatic, you're like, do I have any stories that could be funny? I'm not going to crack a random joke very well and very easily. So I actually started applying this with moments that particularly made me laugh. And they could even have been random encounters or things that my son said, or that I stumbled across, or a funny incident. And I realized having those stories massively helped me inject that lightness and humor that I was really seeking, that didn't come very naturally to me.
Beautiful. Yeah, that is so cool. Because I find it also personally pretty easy to go into the emotions, but to humor, that's sometimes a bit more challenging. So good job on making that a habit.
So the second point you said, these coaching stories, how I see this is very key to being inspirational, because you said that we need to look into it's like looking into the past and the lessons that we have learned from that could then be a good takeaway for somebody else. For me, that is inherently part of being inspirational, because you're showing a journey, and there's always going to be that moment of like overcoming the adversity or overcoming the hardship that leads to a takeaway, and crucially, other people believing that that is possible for them. Do you have any other tips when it comes to how to be more inspiring as a speaker?
Yeah, there it's about how willing are you to go through the rock bottom of your experience. Because I noticed when I started on the storytelling journey, my stories were often maybe not the best. Why? Because I still had this kind of distance where I thought, okay, I'm going to go this way, but I'm not going to go all the way, where I bring in this pure, raw vulnerability. And so if you really want to inspire someone, if you really want to connect to them, well, then you just got to revisit this rock bottom. This is the part where people will find most inspiration on. It is those moments that you absolutely hate, but those moments will be the ones that inspire people the most.
I've done over 150 podcast episodes, and one that sparked the most messages that people actively reached out and shared things with me, it was when I actually told the story in real time, not talking about the past, but in real time about a big business failure that I had had. And I remember feeling so much shame around that, of like, I don't know if this is the right approach. I'm feeling incredibly vulnerable right now, and I'm not sure what this does to my authority if I share that. And I think that is a fear that many of us can identify with, of like, how much should I open up about these things, and is it appropriate? But what I will say in my own experience was that I did feel nervous about it, and I was so moved by the connection that generated.
Wow, beautiful. I'm going to look for that episode later.
Yeah, it was a very, very raw one. I think it still puts tears in my eyes because it was like, a hard time. But there is something about that vulnerability, and it's something that many of us shy away from. So what would you say to that? Or anyone who's experiencing that?
I would encourage you to start sharing many more challenges throughout the week. So maybe this inspires some people. What I started about 30 days ago is to record every single day a video on TikTok where I just talk about any random topic. And why TikTok? Because I have zero audience there. No one cares. No one knows me there. And so I can experiment. But what I've mostly used it for is just to share a story, be vulnerable, and share something that I've learned from that. And so what I would encourage anyone to do is do the same process. Reflect almost every single day. Hey, what has been a tough situation from yesterday? What did I learn from that? Might that inspire other people? And then just make it a habit of sharing that with the people. Because at the start, we think like, no one cares about my business. No one cares about my life. But you'll be surprised, like the amount of messages that I get sometimes through those videos. It's even larger than the fully crafted, scripted, edited videos that I put out there, just through this rawness. And I would say, start just sharing anything completely unfiltered. And then at one point, you can maybe fine tune it. But when you're starting off, just maybe on social media, choose a platform that you don't care about, where no one knows you, and then just start speaking from the heart and see how it lands with you, but also with your audience.
What about if we're applying this to somebody who is in a corporate space and they know that they want to be more vulnerable, but the environment doesn't naturally invite it as much?
I have a tip, but there I have to admit, I don't practice it as much as I would preach right now.
That's it. Environment does matter.
Well, one thing that I always wanted to do is I talk to my mom, let's say twice a week. And every single time I'm like, okay, today I'm going to share something more personal, something that really means. And then oftentimes I just don't do it. And so I would say start with your friends, right? Start with your friends, with your family, and just before the conversation, think, can I share something that is really meaningful to me? And then just focus, hey, you don't have to tell your entire romantic life with that person. But even if you just share one meaningful thing, that already opens up this level of conversation that is more meaningful.
Yeah. I want to add something here, because a question I get very, very frequently is what is the balance between authenticity and vulnerability and oversharing? And in my experience, when this is in a conversational context, it should generally be reciprocal. Because otherwise, if it's one person who is bearing their soul and the other person is quite closed and not asking more prompting questions to go deeper, for example, that could then result in somebody having that experience of like just being dumped on, like they're just offloading onto you, as opposed to this being the seeds that build mutual trust and connection and a friendship or a positive working relationship and so forth. So I think one of the keys here is that you open up just enough, show enough that it opens the door for other people to have that trust and safety that they could do the same thing in return. And I think when that is done mutually over a period of time, that is when we start building more meaningful relationships with people as well.
That's it. Beautiful. One thing that I would like to add there, because I get this oftentimes as well in workshops where people say, hey, I don't want to overshare. And what I've seen from experience, the number of people that undershare, probably 9 out of 10. The amount that overshares, I would say 1 out of 10 max. I rarely, but really rarely see someone that overshares. So it's this very common concern. But I would say, hey, go out there, overshare almost, and then get to a normal level, because even this oversharing will just be an okay level.
Yeah, that is certainly my experience as well. So I vouch for that. Let's come to a formula. Let's say, what is something that you've given us the stories, the overview here, telling a story at the start to captivate, the coaching story and the customer story, the success story here. What would you say for somebody to construct this so they don't fall into the trap of giving too much context and just going on and on and on, which makes them think, yes, this really was inefficient use of time and not very effective or persuasive? What would you give to people as a quick formula for a beginner to get started with this, to apply it in business starting this week? Where would you start?
Okay. First, I would say eliminate as much context as possible. Oftentimes in business, we're like, oh, here's the company's history and all my product responsibilities, blah, 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 blah. And then already 2 minutes is over. So in 99% of the stories, you can cut all the context. And so cut the context and straight away go to a challenge. Go to a challenge. Let's say we take the customer story. And so that challenge can be, hey, 3 weeks ago, I walked into the office of this accounting manager at this tech company. First thing that guy says, hi, Philipp. This last workshop was absolutely terrible. I don't know what the engagement scores were, but people left this entire thing completely demotivated. Boom. Now we're into the story. Now we're talking, right? So my first tip would be cut the context. Second tip, zoom into one specific challenge. So what's the problem here? What's the problem? Maybe that's your own problem. Maybe that's a problem of a coworker. Maybe that's a problem of a customer. But zoom into one specific challenge there. When you share that problem, there are 2 techniques that I use the most. First one is inner dialogue. And that is the thoughts that you were thinking in that specific moment. So for example, let's say a manager tells me, I share a story about me not getting the promotion. Instead of just saying, I was very disappointed, I can say, in this moment, I thought, oh man, this sucks, right? I've been working so hard on this, and now they're not even giving me any reward for that. Fuck them, right? So you share the thoughts that are going on in your mind. That's the first one. The second one is the dialogue. So inner dialogue is the thoughts. Outer dialogue is what did someone say in that moment. So instead of saying, my manager was very disappointed with me, you say, in this moment, my manager looked at me and said, Philipp, what on earth was that? You were all over the place. Did you look at the slides? See, this is the difference. Quote the other person. Use the exact words of that moment. So to recap, cut the context and zoom into one specific challenge as quickly as possible. Ideally, sharing what is going on in your mind and sharing what was said in that crucial moment.
Mm-hmm. Should we talk in the present tense? Mm-hmm. This is something that I've heard to bring people into the story, to feel like it is happening right now. It's present. It's not, it's, I was born in 1993 and back in the day we did this and that and this, right? It's like, no, it is October the 12th, 2012, and my boss walks in and tells me something I'll never forget.
Yeah. So on this one, in storytelling on stages, like on theaters and storytelling slams, yes, they always use the present tense because it pulls people more into the moment. For business storytelling, I don't have such a strong preference. I believe that you can use both tenses and use the one that feels most authentic to you. Now, business storytelling is not about having the 100% perfect story. It doesn't matter which tense you're using. It is about, can you tell it in a way that feels comfortable, conversational, and is still catchy? It doesn't matter which ones you're using, in my humble perspective.
So I'm curious, finish this sentence for me, Philipp, here. A good story in business should always what? A good story in business should always
be relatable.
Can I just say why I love that? So many people have come to me and said, oh, but Shannon, I don't have a good story to share because I haven't had this life-changing experience or a tragic accident or a horrific rock bottom moment, and they go on. And it's this belief that my story isn't good enough to share because nothing special enough has happened to me. And my response is exactly what you've just said here about relatability, because it's in those moments that we deem mundane that actually they're the birthplace of connection because they are so relatable. You know, I share about an instance where my son is sitting on the floor vying for my attention, asking, Mummy, just please play with me. And I'm still tapping away on my laptop saying, no, darling, I've got some work emails to finish off. And those kind of moments, I recognize because they are so relatable, that does actually generate the connection. And then the takeaway, whatever that may be, resonates more deeply as well.
So true.
Philipp, is there any way that people can stay in touch with you to get some more insights into storytelling and public speaking? Where should we come to follow you?
Yeah, the best place to follow me is on YouTube. On YouTube, I publish right now a video every single Thursday. So check this out. Pretty much everything that I know I put out there. And in case you want to go even a little bit deeper, maybe check out one or two of my books. I've just published my third one, I think a month ago. So check that one out. Everything that I know that I've learned over the past few years is in there. And also say hi on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there as well.
Cool. Philipp, thank you so much for all of your wisdom and your insights. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Shannon.